Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this video. As you're probably aware, Sloan C is a consortium of members who come together to create a community. Today we're here with our international member, Maha Bali, who is hanging out today with us from Egypt. We'd like to thank Maha for making the time to share her Sloan C conference experiences with us so that others can get an idea of what it's like to expect as a virtual participant if they choose to join us from the conference virtually. In her blog that she writes, she stated that the virtual conference experience was possibly her favorite conference experience ever. And she also said the key to enjoying virtual participation is not to think of it as something less than being there face-to-face, but rather to think of it as something quantitatively different from being there face-to-face and enjoy those differences. And today we'll get the chance to hear more about her experience and to ask her some questions. And just a little bit about Maha's background. She is an associate professor of practice at the Center for Learning and Teaching at the American University in Cairo, which is, of course, in Egypt. So, Maha, can you share a little bit more about your background and how you became passionate about learning and technology with us?
Okay, so I'll try to keep this brief. So I originally did my undergraduate degree in computer science, and I wasn't someone who liked computers or technology at the time. And after I graduated, I worked in IT at Procter & Gamble, Egypt for a while, and I realized while I was there that I'm more passionate about training and education than I am about the IT aspects of things. So I switched careers. I started doing a Master's of Education in E-Learning, and I started working at the Center for Learning and Teaching. And what we do at the Center for Learning and Teaching is faculty development. And so because of my IT background, a lot of the ways I was helping people with education was to use technology for learning and teaching. And then afterwards, after I'd been in that for a while, I started becoming also a teacher educator. So I teach teachers about using educational technology. And then I went ahead and did my PhD about education in general, not about educational technology specifically. But as I was finalizing my PhD, I started to, there was the start of the MOOCs and all those kinds of online communities that you could join, and then I started getting on Twitter, and all of that made me even more passionate about the power social media has for education in general. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thanks, Maha. Holly, did you want to ask the next question?
Well, I think, you really stand out to me as an important member of our ET4 Online virtual conference, and so I'm dying to ask how you made the selection of ET4 Online, how you made the selection of virtual. Is this something you're often seeking out virtual conferences, or just tell us more how you chose ET4 Online.
Okay, so the voice cut up a little bit, but I think the major idea was what am I seeking out virtual conferences and how I came about choosing Sloan C particularly for that one. So in general, the reason virtual conferences work really good for me is that I have a young child, she's 2.5, and I had to take her with me to defend my thesis last October, and that was not a very pleasant experience, and it wasn't easy, and I can't travel a lot, not as much as I want to anyway, and I would have to take someone with me to take care of her, arrange for someone to take care of her here. So the idea of being able to do some professional development without having to leave the country is really, really important to me. And so that's also why I do a lot of MOOCs and things like that, where I can get that kind of professional development without leaving here. And I also don't think that local conferences are enough because there's so much out there. And you can connect with people through social media and through virtual conferences and things like that. So why shouldn't I take advantage of that? And how I came about to choose ET4 Online specifically is a combination of 3 factors. The first is that my office last year, when there was a blended learning conference in the summer, bought some sort of institutional access to that conference, but the timing of it was just as I was submitting my PhD thesis, so I couldn't participate synchronously, but we've been using the recordings throughout the year for our own professional development and presenting them to each other and things like that. So I already had that idea that these things existed through Sloan C. The second thing is that I got this email, and I'm not really sure if I got it because I was already participating in the blended learning conference of last year, or because I'm a Merlot peer reviewer, but I got that announcement by email. And what happened when I got that announcement is that I noticed who the speakers were. And a lot of them are actually my friends. They're people I've never met face to face, but they're people I know. So Jesse Stommel and Sean Michael Morris, these are my people. These are my friends, you know. Jen Ross, I took her MOOC, you know, the one she co-teaches with several other people at Edinburgh. And then there are people that I, at the time, had heard of but didn't know personally, like Jim Groom, who, of course, you all know later became a really good friend of mine. And there were people who were with me in the RISO 14 MOOC, for example, like Rebecca Hogue, who was a presenter. I mean, she wasn't one of the keynotes with her picture up, but she's someone who's important to me, and I was like really proud of her to see that she's presenting there. And then also I talked to some people at RISO 14 and saw that some of them were planning to participate as well, whether face-to-face or online, and that also I think encouraged me to apply for that. And so I just talked to my boss about it. I'm like, you know, I'm not going to cost you some really expensive conference this year. I want to go to this one, and it's going to cost you very little money. And I said, well, why don't we get the buy two, get one free thing so that others in my office can participate as well. And so we did that.
It's fabulous to hear how both it's just a format that really is pretty powerful. Like you mentioned, just both the convenience of not having to be away from home, be away from your schedule, your routine, but also the ability to connect with people at an international level, which is it's really impressive. And then on top of that, you found the program that had people and a number of sessions that were really lining up with your community and your interests. That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. Let's see. I think I'm pass it to Kathleen.
Well, you kind of talked about this, but the whole experience being a virtual attendee, what was that like? I mean, I happen to, when I go to our conferences, for example, I like to go in virtually as well, because for some of the things that you were talking about, I like to chat with people. And obviously, when you're sitting in a big, you know, hall, you can't really chat because people will poke you in the eye. But it's really kind of fun to kind of like share ideas with people.
Right, right. The interesting thing is we just had a conference recently right after I'd attended yours, and I was one of the organizers, and I was tweeting a lot during the conference and having side conversations as well during the conference. So I had my own virtual conference with ours, and we had it streaming and everything. But so you were asking me about how my virtual conference experience, right?
Yes.
So I'm not really sure.
Yeah, just what was the experience like participating virtually? Did you feel like you were part of the conference? Did you feel engaged? Excuse me.
I think our connectivity is waning a little bit here. Maha, can you hear us? I see a frozen face.
I see a frozen face too. I know.
Well, maybe give it a moment. She mentioned she might try to come back in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we can probably sort of do a little bit of chatting while Maha maybe troubleshoot some of her technology challenges. I think that she was really amazing. I know that I served as a session chair for a couple of sessions. And it looks like Maha may be back.
Maha, are you there?
Yes, I am. I've got this blue thing that says I'm experiencing network difficulties, but it's gone. So we should be okay. Okay. So did I hear the question correctly? You were asking just about how I experienced the virtual parts.
Right. What was it like being a virtual participant?
Right. So I was originally very concerned about things like what just happened right now, about connectivity issues, that maybe I have a 1 megabit per second DSL at home, and because of the time difference, I can't join from work where the internet connection is better. So I actually took those days off so I could be home for the whole thing. And so that's like, it was like 3:30 to like 10 p.m. here.
Wow.
And the later in the day the internet connection.
Oh
no.
As we are experiencing now, perhaps a little bit later in the day, it's harder. I do see her picture, though.
I do, too.
Yeah, I got lost. You lost me for a sec.
You're back.
Yes. Yes, I'm back. So this didn't happen during the conference, interestingly. So that was really, really lucky that it didn't happen. And Cairo occasionally has electricity cuts, and that only happened once during the conference, and it was when I was putting my daughter to sleep, so it wasn't a big deal. And also, like, my husband and my mom helped out by taking care of her during the conference. So anyway, so I was able to participate much better than I thought. And the first step in that virtual participation was, first of all, letting the people who I know who were presenting know that I was going to be there, letting my network know that I was going to be there in case they were going to be there, so that we know that we can exchange notes during the conference. And also, the Jim Groom thing, that was just serendipity, really. I mean, I just followed him on Twitter, and I just sent him something like, "I'm looking forward to your sessions." And he just followed me back, and he's like, "Well, let's do something together beforehand." And then 2 days later, I'm like, "So where's the link you were going to tell me about?"
That's
And
so
he's like,
cool.
I'm getting there, I'm getting there." And it was really interesting because, I just couldn't believe. I was talking to Dave Cormier, and I was like, do you know why Jim Groom is doing this with me? Does he know me? Did you tell him something about me? Because I wasn't really sure why he was being so friendly with me. But I mean, I think that just being in touch with the keynote speaker, of course, I mean, that just like, oh, I've got to attend his talk. I've got to start working with him, and it just motivated me a little bit, that extra bit. And so that chance to actually start doing things for the conference in advance, and the way Jim was tweeting about it, and then I decided, well, I'm creating a blog on his domain anyway, so I'll blog about it, and then people started to get excited about that, and then when you go to that second session of the conference and you find somebody bringing up your blog and answering the questions that you asked right there in that session, you don't feel like you're not there. You feel like you're in that room. And I remember the session facilitator that day was Jean, and she was amazing because the minute I got in the room, she asked, "Where are you from?" And I'm Jean, and so on. And she's like, "Where are you from?" I'm like, "Don't ask me, ask Jim Groom." And she's like, "I'm going to go run and do that right now." And not everyone would have done that. Some people would have been like, "Huh, weird person," But she went and asked him. And so throughout the session, she was taking questions from the virtual session to Jim. And then one of my friends who was in the room, actually, in the actual physical room, told me that Jean was so into the virtual participation, she wasn't looking at the people in the room at all. So that was also interesting. So I mean, you'd think it would be so much easier to see the people in the room, and so that was one thing. And then the other thing, there was another session that I was in where the session facilitator was totally ignoring us and not connecting at all with the virtual participants, and where the virtual participants were not talking to each other. So I was just talking to myself. So I just left, and I was there listening to the session, but I started tweeting. And then some interesting back-channel Twitter conversations started happening, and that there were actually two in parallel. And you can't do that in real life. You can only do that online, like having two conversations at the same time on Twitter with two different groups of people all together, and then having people listen in that you didn't even know or ever heard about, and that was amazing. There was another session with Jesse Stommel and Sean Michael Morris about their journal, and this is one of the sessions where I didn't really need to attend that session. I had met Jesse and Sean on Hangout before. I had already published 2 articles with them. I knew them really well, and I knew sort of what they were going to talk about, but I still wanted to be in that session. And what was great about that session is that the virtual chat was very interesting. And the people on the virtual chat, were enjoying it so much that we decided to create a Google Doc of the conversation so that Jesse and Sean could see it later, because they couldn't obviously, have it right there while they were talking. And so that was also very interesting. There were also times when I took stuff from what was going on in the conference to the Rise of 14 Facebook group to talk about it with them. So it was sort of like totally off the conference itself and just talking with my friends about what was going on in the conference. What else was there? But I mean, generally, two of the other interesting things that I could do as a virtual participant was, if I really didn't like a session, I could just leave and go to another one without seeming too rude, and I thought that was really interesting. I've heard that some conferences allow you to do that face-to-face, but it's still a bit offensive to the speakers, right? And the other thing is that, because people couldn't see me, like now you can see me, but in the virtual conference they couldn't see me. So if I had to go change a diaper, I could do that and come back. If my daughter was screaming or whatever, I could just go calm her down and come back, and I could still hear what was going on in the conference. I didn't have to miss out on it if I couldn't sit right in front of the computer. So.
Maha, I think that's fantastic, and I appreciate you sharing. For those people who don't know, Maha was talking about the session chairs. So those are people who are actually in the live session, and they sit in the back of the room near the camera person. And we set up computers. Sloan C sets them up so they sit down and they're connected, hardwired, so that they can interact with the virtual participants. And so Maha was talking about how she's had some great experience just sort of chatting. I actually had the opportunity to chat with Maha at one of the sessions, and we were sort of talking about some key themes and went a little off on a couple of different themes at some times as well. And I think that's one of the great pieces is that if you had a question during a session, they help relay it to the presenter to get it for you. And other than your experience with me, could you share sort of how some of the positive things really helped you with session chairs during the conference?
So are you talking about specific things that session chairs did that were positive?
Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, there were I think definitely the ones who early on let us know we're your voice in the room, and if you have something you want to ask, let us know. Some of them were very explicit about that, and some of them were very explicit about this is my name, and others didn't really introduce themselves very well, or I missed that, or maybe I came in late to the room. But it was really helpful when they did do that, and it was very personal. It was also very interesting when they encouraged us to have side discussions that might have been slightly off what was happening in the session, and that was also, I mean, that was just one of the advantages of being online in the virtual session, to be able to do that. And yeah, I mean, I think those were the basic things that some of the session chairs did. Some of them did a much better job than others in terms of actually getting our questions to the speakers, but it also depends on the speakers themselves. So some speakers are probably more aware of that or more careful about that than others. So.
I really think it's interesting how you talked about those two different methods of connecting, and obviously that you could be back channeling in Google Plus or in other places, but you mentioned specifically that the session chat, which is really limited to folks that are attending the virtual conference, and then the well, I mean, not necessarily because the folks that are at the conference can't look at it, but as you mentioned, it's not you know, often that people are going to be in both places, both there listening and then also in the virtual chat. Although I think we do have a few that do that, being in the virtual chat and then also using that Twitter hashtag. And then you mentioned that extension of a Google Doc that was sort of the community just, you know, saying, we want this, here we go, we'll make it. But what do you think as a seasoned, you know, online networker, really, because you've used these technologies to interact, to collaborate. You mentioned you're writing papers with folks and using these media. So, okay, coming back to my question, what are you looking for in a conference back channel? What are you looking for in a conference hashtag as a virtual attendee?
That's an interesting question, because when you ask that question, it has a lot to do with the participants more than with the organizers. So it has a lot to do with whether the participants in that conference will be willing to have those discussions and will be the kinds of people who are like cyborgs who can be in the conference and also contributing through the hashtag. Sometimes, I mean, there are two kinds of things that happen with the hashtag, three kinds of things. The first kind of thing is people just tweeting what was actually happening in a session, and that's useful, I think. And I think it's actually useful. I think I do it because I know a lot of people I know who are not at the conference will benefit from some of the stuff that's in it. And you know, knowing, oh, well, Amy Collier said this today, or like in the Rise of 14, when they mentioned the collaborative autoethnography, I let the Rise of 14 people know that Jen Ross and Amy Collier had mentioned it, and that was intentionally targeted towards people outside the conference. The other thing is like those, you comment on something and then you have a back channel conversation that takes off in a different direction. So I had one of those really interesting ones with a group of different people who I don't think all know each other, and some of them don't even know me. Just taking off from something that I tweeted, but then going off in a totally different direction. And that's what really happens in an actual conference when you have a chance to network with people. Like when you're face-to-face, you leave the session, you start a conversation, you go into something else. Hopefully some people you don't know will be in that table having dinner or something, and you can have that conversation. So you can do that online. And then the third thing is just tweeting links for people's blog posts or anything useful related to the conference, or links to people's slide shares. I thought that was also interesting, just those resources. And so these are the three things that I saw a lot in the hashtag. And of course, the fourth thing, which is related to the conference organizers, is tweeting information and retweeting interesting things. So I was really happy about people retweeting the blog posts that I was writing, for example, so that more people could notice them or read them. Does that sort of answer your question?
Absolutely. I think you made some really interesting observations there, and how that affordance of being able to pick up a conversation with an external community, that's a particularly cool outcome of that. And I really appreciate your thoughts on that, and even how you mentioned what people are bringing to it, their comfort level with being in these different spaces at the same time. And I think we had an exceptionally comfortable, savvy, confident, open group of folks that were participating in both the virtual and in the on-site, and that made for a special blend. Very cool. Thank you. Thank you.
So I have a question for you. How did you decide what sessions you were going to attend? When you approached the conference program, did you have some particular skills that you wanted to fine-tune, or some areas that you were more interested in than others?
Right. You might not like the answer to this question very much. To some extent, I chose some of the sessions where my friends were. So in real life, you do that too sometimes, right? You go to the sessions where your friends are. So like I said,
you can share with them too. I mean, I totally get it.
Yeah, and so, for example, let's talk about Jim Groom's session. I had already done what he was going to do in the conference before the conference. I didn't actually need to attend that session in the sense of I didn't need to learn as much, but what I did in that session was sort of like be his sidekick or something. And like, for example, I was supporting the virtual participants if they had issues logging in and doing things like that to the Reclaim website and so on. So that was the Jim Groom one. But initially, if I for the sessions where there wasn't any of my friends presenting, basically what I was doing was thinking, is this a session where I might want to synchronously have a discussion about the content, or is this something that I can watch in recording and not feel like I'd missed out on too much?
Yeah.
And so that's how I was choosing them. So that's the basic criteria.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. I mean, I do that in person too. Like if I'm at a conference and face-to-face, I may ask a colleague, what session they're attending. And I'll go, oh yeah, I might want to see that too, and I'll go sit with them, and we'll kind of, write notes to each other or something. But yeah, I get it. I totally get it.
And then there's another small thing that, usually sessions, you have those different tracks, and you do have that for the Sloan C conference. But because I was virtual, I was looking just at the stream sessions. I wasn't searching by track.
Yes.
But to be honest, I think because it was the right conference for me at this stage in my career, I was coming back from maternity leave, and I was, and it was an emerging technologies conference. That's my thing, and so almost everything was interesting for me. There were very few sessions that I was like, oh, I don't care what they're talking about. Every single session was interesting for me. So it wasn't like, there are other conferences where the tracks are very clear, like the EDUCAUSE and the syllabus ones. I really don't want to hear about the total technology things, the technology infrastructure and things like that. But in this one, really, it was the right conference for me. Everything in it is interesting for me, and I look forward to the recorded sessions. And it's the same for the Blended Learning Conference my institution had last year as well. Most of what you guys do is relevant, so.
Wow, that is awesome to hear. That's really, really exciting, and it makes me feel like there really is a community around these teaching techniques, especially for those of us that work in faculty development and are trying to help people use these new medias. And speaking of that, you talked a little bit earlier, Maha, about how you pre-networked. You went out, you followed certain people like Jim, made some connections to people that you knew would be there, that you knew were attending. So you made yourself known and communicated a little bit and benefited from that as you were moving forward. I'm curious if you could even talk a little bit more about your decision to blog about the conference and to put yourself out there in social media, and how that worked for you as a strategy.
Okay. I'm a compulsive blogger. I mean, I blog almost every day anyway. Blogging to me is just the way I organize my thoughts, and for some reason, at some point, I only started my blog last December, so I've only had it for like 5 months, and I only started tweeting less than a year ago. So,
hey, Maha, could you cut and paste the URL to your blog in the chat window?
I have a new blog now. I reclaimed my own domain.
Yay!
So
For you.
okay. Um, so I'm pasting that now. All right, I'm pasting that for you. So yeah, I like so blogging is two things. It's for me. I do it for me to organize my thoughts, to just so things like also curating some of the tweets that are going on, just to remember what happened in the conference. And the second thing is just share it with people who aren't at the conference. So it's very interesting because people at the conference were reading it, but I was actually writing it for mostly for another audience. Uh, so the parts when I was talking about what it was like being in a virtual conference, I was writing that to encourage more people to do that, because I know a lot of people have cost issues that they can't travel to every single conference they want to, and it's much cheaper to attend the virtual conference. It's not just a cheaper conference, but there's no air travel, there's no missing days of work, and so on. And also, like, for whatever other circumstances that people can't travel. So I wanted to encourage more people to try this out. And we just had an open access conference at my institution, and I have to say that this affinity for openness is clearly not for everybody. It's much more difficult for some other people to understand why the heck are you talking about everything online and open social media, and why does everybody have to know everything about you and so on. But I mean, for me, it's like it's mostly professional stuff, and it's okay if people get to know me personally as well. But I'm helping other people with what I'm thinking about, and why would I not do that? And a lot of the time I get feedback from other people that helps me develop as well. And blogging has done that for me big time. And I enjoy reading other people's blogs and interacting that way as well. And Twitter is just, I mean, the kinds of relationships you can build with people on Twitter. I mean, the way Dave Cormier now is a really good friend of mine, and he's someone that I got to know because I asked Jesse Stommel actually about alternative approaches to instructional design, and I knew Jesse from Twitter. And then I blogged something about Dave, and then I tweeted to him to ask him something while I was blogging about rhizomatic learning, and then that's how we got to know each other, and I got into the Rhizo 14 MOOC, and all of that started on Twitter, so, and because I was blogging, and there was somewhere where people could go and find out a little bit more about what I was thinking and where I was going, and it's just, this is nothing specifically to do with the conference, but it just, that's why I blog a lot and I tweet a lot, and the more people I connect with on Twitter, and you can get to know people a lot more through that. It's very short. It's only 140 characters, but you can get to know someone that way. You can. I think you can.
I'm really impressed that you mentioned that you started using Twitter and blogging relatively recently. I think that's something that folks, we'd like to see them just try it out, just get more comfortable. And as you mentioned, putting your thoughts out there openly, being comfortable with people learning from you, and organizing your thoughts as you're working on your post, I think that's really cool and inspires me. Your conference participation in the blogosphere, I thought, was really cool, and and I did want to mention, because Kathleen had asked for your blog address, and on Google Plus, where this Hangout is happening, if anyone's watching, there is a link to Maha on Twitter and her blog as well. So please go out and read and get to know sort of what she's been doing with her blog. And thank you for sharing. It's so exciting to hear how you connected with Dave and kind of some of these other backstories that are going on in your professional network. It's really cool.
Well, Maha, I like how you talked about the piece of being human and open, and I think that that's one of the pieces, was that I felt like I did know you before we actually got to see you today in this chat because of all those pieces. And at the conference, I had the great chance to meet people and have interviews with them and talk to them, which was a fantastic experience. But it was interesting how I feel like I got to know them so much better online with the things that they shared. And even Jim Groom, when we had a recent hangout with him, it was really talking about how he how human he was and how he would share things and do things. And I think that that's what people want. And all of us have our own human things, and we have our own little quirkiness about us, and I think that's what makes us special. And so we're excited that you're going to join us again for the Blended Conference as a virtual participant. So we look forward to, again, seeing you in all the sessions and sharing with us and doing your blogging and your tweeting. But what kind of strategy? I mean, can you share with us sort of, as other people think about going to the conference, what kind of strategy do you use to figure out what sessions you want, who you want to connect with, and how you use social media to form those relationships?
Right. So I sort of talked about this earlier, but let me just talk about it about the Blended Learning Conference because I still don't know who's going to be there. So what I would do is look at the sessions that are there, figure out if there's someone there that I'd read, like maybe I'd read their blogs or I'd read their articles before and I want to get to know them more, or if one of the sessions is more interesting. And you guys on your on the conference program, I think you give links to people's Twitter accounts. So if I find someone really interesting, I'll do this. I mean, Jim Groom has changed me for life in this. I will tweet to people in advance and let them know that I'm going to their sessions, and see if they, if we can start the conversation earlier, so that then after their session, maybe you could also have that conversation with them. You know what? Can I just say one small thing though? The hashtags that you use for each session, the ones that are long numbers. Those, I don't like those. It would be much nicer if you kept, because you have for the keynote speakers, it would be the speaker's name, ET4, and then the speaker's name. So if you had something closer to that, then it'd be easier for people who are following the hashtag on Twitter to understand what we were talking about.
Right.
Great suggestion.
Yeah, and then the other thing is I started blogging and tweeting about the conference maybe as soon as I signed up for it, or maybe even earlier because I was trying to register and I had issues. So I was tweeting to Sloan Consortium and Merlot like maybe a month before the conference started, and so I started to get to know a few people that way as well. It's like, if you use the hashtag and you find out who else is going, and some of them might be people on your network that you know really well, and some of them might be people who you just started following recently and you don't know them very well, but you'll get to know them because you realize that you're all at the same conference, and you'll exchange ideas about where you want to go, what you want to do. And then the other thing is, if for some reason the actual, and this is something that's a strategy when you're in the conference, is if you find a session where you're not getting a lot of discussion with the virtual participants, or there aren't many on there, you could just use Twitter for that. I know not everybody's on Twitter, but I think if you're on Twitter, it makes a big difference for virtual participation, because you open up this, you're going beyond the conference itself. You can talk to other people as well.
I really love that strategy of preparing and trying to connect with people, and I think people really like that aspect that you care enough to learn about them before their session.
I love that. I think that's an awesome strategy. A great tip. You said that for the ET4 that you made a significant time commitment. I mean, you took time off of work. Are you going to do the same thing again for Blended?
Yes. Well, it's probably going to be easier because it's going to be in the summer anyway. So I could be just it could be just in the middle of my summer holiday. But yeah, because it makes sense, right? Because if I was going to an actual conference, a physical conference, I would be taking time off work. Yeah. So I told my boss, I'm going to really do this. I'm not just going to drop in and out. I'm going to commit the whole time. And because of the time difference, I would have had to miss sessions commuting back from work, and the connection wouldn't have been really good. And why would I miss out? Why would I miss out on that? And I'd have to stay up a little bit later than usual to just be in the sessions. And of course, I stayed up afterwards to write my blog. I think just that part I think is important. It's treating it like it's an actual conference and taking the time away from work to do it. Because I know some people signed up but had to work in the middle, and so that must have that affected, of course, how much they could participate. And that's fine because the sessions are recorded, but I mean they miss out on the synchronous aspects of it.
Right.
Because it does seem like you got such a great experience from the interaction with others and tweeting live real time that you would have missed all of that if you were just doing the recording.
Yeah, exactly.
But I also feel, and I'm kind of putting words in your mouth, Maha, but I feel that you really got a great experience out of the conference because of the way that you approached it. You did your homework. Then when you were there, you were fully engaged with the speakers and other participants, and then afterwards you blogged about it. I mean, you were totally immersed. I just think that's such a great strategy if you can do that, to get so much out of an event like that.
Right, I agree. I don't think you're putting words in my mouth. I think you're right. I did sort of. It was very intentional for me, and it's like, I think in professional development in general, I make those choices about what deserves to immerse myself in and what doesn't deserve that. Mm-hmm. And this one really looked like it was one of those things. And again, it's the kinds of people who are presenting, who are also open educators, and the very good technology. I mean, this is not to be underestimated. The technology rarely had any glitches. This is very rare in synchronous things. I've almost never been in a session that was that good. In any other technology that was as good. I've facilitated a lot of online dialogue. I've been in a lot of Illuminate sessions and all sorts of things like that. This was one of the best conference experiences, streaming-wise, that I'd ever been in. So you've got some good tech people over there. I'm sure some sessions weren't as good as others, but I didn't have any really bad ones. So
glad to hear that.
So yeah, but yeah, I mean it's and again, if it was a conference about maybe Shakespeare, there might not be so many people on Twitter to keep it going. But because you guys do ed tech, so people are usually a little bit more savvy and a little bit more open and a little bit more familiar with things like Twitter and social media and so on. So that helps, I think, a lot. I couldn't generalize that to conferences outside our field,
Yeah.
At our annual conference in the morning, Kathleen does announcements before plenary and keynote speakers, and the one morning she was saying that we crashed Twitter because the hashtags were so popular that we got that blue whale of Twitter. The Twitter's down.
Oh,
the fail whale. So I'm curious, just extending that thought, because I feel like, wow, if you can immerse yourself, I like how Kathleen described that as really immersing yourself, and you gave us some good ideas of what that was like, in terms of setting aside the time and preparing, having time to prepare, to get ready, and then also taking time to reflect and writing those blog posts, but engaging while you're there rather than watching the recording allows this community to develop and these relationships to develop, and there's a momentum. And to me, it's very much like when you're on site at a conference, and there's that energy and feeling connected to people and conversations and learning together. It's really exciting. But I feel like when I'm attending virtually, at the end of the day, it's almost like, I miss that social connection of being around people. And I wonder, how you channeled that energy. It's almost like I didn't want to just go straight from virtual conference, into the rest of the world. I just kind of want to, reflect in that bubble. So to me, I spend a lot of time, maybe even more time than I would spend on social media on site, looking at the hashtag. And I just wondered, what that was like for you, as a conference was like. As you're coming to a close, how did you feel? Where did that energy go? Did you feel isolated, or how would you describe that?
It's a good question. What you're describing is how I feel when a MOOC is ending, when I'm afraid that the MOOC community is going to end, because these are people I've been working with for like 5 or 6 weeks or whatever. But that's the thing about being with people on Twitter, is that it doesn't really end that way. You've still got those connections. And anyway, because I hadn't met them face-to-face, I had only met them on Twitter, mostly. I could still be meeting them on Twitter, and that's actually the case. I keep seeing these people now in MOOCs or in other situations, or just tweeting on other hashtags, but finding the people back in my life again. So it feels you get less of a withdrawal symptoms than you would normally in a face-to-face one. And we just had a conference face-to-face recently here, but we were doing a lot of tweeting, and so we're still in touch on Twitter and on people's blogs and reflecting on that conference. So I think I'm taking a lot of what I've learned here to our own context and trying to apply it to whenever we have virtual.
Awesome.
We had it streaming as well, and yeah. And then there was this other thing that was happening that at the end of the Friday, is that I had a journal article by Hybrid Pedagogy that was coming out that day. So I had just been watching Jesse and Sean give their session, and then the next day my article was out, and so there was there was two things happening at the same time. So usually when a new article of mine is out, it's a high. So the conference was ending, but there was the high of the article coming out, and I always had my other community of online friends to fall back on and report about the conference to as well. So a lot of people at the conference were my friends anyway. So some of them were attending, some of them were presenting. So it wasn't it wasn't total withdrawal at all for me, to be honest.
Very cool. It sounds actually like it just continued to blossom, and that the connections that you've made, you know, that's really exciting to hear it. It sounds a lot like experiences I used to feel that maybe I'd only have on site at a conference, making those connections with people, at least since Twitter. Twitter's changed conferences so much,
Yes.
but it's, yeah, it makes me think a lot more about how blogging is a big part of that. And again, that's very inspiring. Thanks.
Maha, thank you so much for spending some time in Google Hangouts with us and sharing your experience so others can hear what this potential experience could be like for them. We really appreciate it, and they can connect with you. Obviously, underneath the video, it has that link, and they can actually come and see you at Blended and chat with you in virtual sessions and read blog postings and thoughts that you have. So again, I really want to thank you for the time that you've been spending with us and with sharing with the community as a whole.
Thank you. It was really great talking to you all, Sandra, Holly, and Kathleen. I really enjoyed this, and I hope other people can benefit from it. I hope it's not all me talking in the cloud about about things that people can't imagine. And I'm really looking forward to the Blended Learning Conference, and hopefully it'll be as good or even better.
Thank you so much. I've learned so much, and I think, you know, just in speaking with you today, we can better coach or advise people how to get a totally, you know, rich experience out of not just our conferences, but out of any conference.
Right, and I'd be happy to help out in any other way I can. If you can think of anything else that I can do to help you guys, I'd love to do it.
Thanks, Maha.
Thank you so much, Maha. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you.